We don't like being bored. We've got this really bad problem with it. We can't stand to not feel like we're doing stuff. We're always trying to make a difference in the world. And so we feel like if we have downtime to ourselves, that somehow we're being selfish, that we could be doing more. If somebody needs our help, we could be doing more for our business. We could be doing more for our employees.
If we're avoiding boredom, it's because we're trying to avoid what would arise out of the boredom and what we might have to deal with, I would say emotionally or existentially or spiritually.
This is the Next Peak Podcast, where we help you redefine success and achieve goals that are actually important to you based on research and real life stories. I am one of your hosts today, Clint Herndon, and I'm with my good friend, Dr. Parker Houston. We're going to talk about how to solve your problems by subtraction. That's right. You heard that right. Solve your problems by subtraction. This is actually one of our favorite topics, the one that we both have to keep relearning. And it's going to be a really favorite topic of our producer when he hears this and starts editing it. It's one of his favorite topics as well. So, Zach, when you hear this one's for you, buddy. Dr. Houston, how are you today, sir?
I am great. We are not totally smoked out in California yet, which is always a good thing. I think we've hit August and we've been able to avoid the heavy smoke. Although anyone that can pray for my in-laws, they're up in the Lake Almanor area and they actually had a 600 AQI a few days ago, apparently. So yeah, just keep them in your prayers. If you know what the air quality index is, 600 is just unheard of. I mean, it can't even go outside. Okay, so yeah, today we're going to be talking about a topic that Clint and I have talked about together for years and years. You gave me a book called Essentialism many years ago, which has definitely been one of the most formative books in my life in terms of trying to implement the ideas in it. But it's also something both of us continue to really struggle with. So The big idea from today is that our brain is such that it tries to solve most of life's problems through adding things for a solution instead of removing things to find the solution. And if that doesn't totally make sense to you, we're going to break down a really fascinating new study or series of studies that really illustrates this very well. But before we talk about that, let me kind of talk about my productivity journey. So, Clint, both you and I are really into productivity, so feel free to chime in. But yeah, several years ago, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago, I got really into productivity. I was looking for all the time hacks I could possibly find. This was ironically before I had kids, so I had absolutely no idea how much my time was going to get hijacked. But I thought I was busy. It was not true, but I perceived myself that way. And so I was trying to find any way I could, mostly at work, to be productive. So I took a bunch of online courses. I read all the psychology studies on it. I read a bunch of books by all the time management gurus. And I did get pretty good at being very, very efficient. But my problem was that anytime I had dead space on my calendar, I just kept adding to it. I volunteered. I did a lot of good stuff with my time, like volunteering at church. I tried to fit exercise in early, as many 5 days a week, was doing marriage dates with my wife. I was trying to set up dates with my kids. And so I just kept cramming stuff in. It's kind of like an overstuffed refrigerator, right? Where every time you open the door, the ketchup container comes flying out, right? And there was a lot of good stuff in my schedule, but I overlooked the most simple solution to productivity. And you might ask, why did I do these things? Clint, maybe I can put you on the spot. Why do most people cram more things into their schedule? Why do you think?
Wow, pop quiz. I would say because we don't like being bored. I'd say that's probably the number one reason. We've got this really bad problem with it, especially in our current day and age of technology, that we can't stand to not feel like we're doing stuff. I think the other thing, though, if I'm going to be a little more positive and a little less pessimistic, it would be that we're always trying to make a difference in the world. And so we feel like if we have downtime to ourselves, that somehow we're being selfish, that we could be doing more. If somebody needs our help, we could be doing more for our business. We could be doing more for our employees. So I don't know. Those would be my two guesses, but.
Yes, you're right on the money. For me personally, I did want to have more positive impact on the world. So that was certainly a huge thing that was driving me in my, some of my making too many commitments. And you're right. We do try to avoid boredom. I think most people do. But then the big question is, why do we avoid stillness or silence? And I think it's from the books I've read and my own personal experience. It's usually because if we're avoiding boredom, it's because we're trying to avoid what would arise out of the boredom and what we might have to deal with, I would say emotionally or existentially or spiritually. Henry Nouwen used to say that when we cut out silence, we cut out the voice of God in our life and his ability to speak to us, which I found very profound and very disturbing at the same time, knowing how much I avoid silence.
Well,
so
that's interesting though, because we've talked about life planning on this show quite a bit. And having a plan and having a vision. And those are all great and wonderful things. But what you're alluding to is that sometimes we hide behind those. We make them, well, I've got to be productive. If I don't jam enough stuff in every category, then I'm not moving towards my life goals. And I think that we miss the mark when we make that an obsession and start to fill our calendar.
Oh my gosh, you and I have not even talked about this. I've had several conversations about this week, this subject.
That's funny. I've had 3 of them too.
Okay. So hopefully this will blow people's minds. I was reading a book last week, and one of the things it said was, any idea taken to its extreme becomes its opposite.
Repeat that again.
Let me say that again. Any idea taken to its extreme becomes its opposite. So I almost put that into this blog post I wrote this week, and this is why we're doing this episode. I think we should actually do an entirely separate podcast on that topic. Carl Jung, the famous psychiatrist, actually came up with a term I found yesterday. I can't remember what it's called. It's a very complicated, I think, Latin word. But maybe we'll do an episode on this. So we have a lot more to say on that topic. But in this case, I think that concept applies because I was trying to become so productive that I probably became highly unproductive. In my goal to get back more time, I just kept cramming things into the time that I created by being more efficient, which was inefficient.
Yeah.
So yeah, to conclude the story, by speeding my life up so much, I diluted my focus by doing too many things, which made me have less impact. And the bigger cost was I couldn't be present. You and I have talked about being present a lot lately, so that is really at the center of this whole thing. And I felt restless and impatient and hurried and rushed and agitated inside, and still do sometimes. So it's something it's a lesson I'm really leaning into right now. So what I overlooked on my productivity journey was to just cut things out. And there's now this series of studies that was published in Nature magazine that is just extremely fascinating. But before I go into that, any other anecdotes or thoughts you want to add to this, Clint?
No, I think that most of us can relate to this. No matter what we're doing in life, we tend to just be busy. And I know you and I talked about it. In fact, we live, 7 miles from each other, and we hadn't seen each other in person for a social outing in I don't know how long, until you went to Tahoe for 2 weeks, and my wife and I drove up to Tahoe. And that's how we carved out time to see each other face to face. I mean, it was great. It was an incredible day. It's beautiful outside. But that just tells you an example of our schedules. Like even though we're both very aware of this issue, we still cram them full to the point where we have to go on vacation just to see our friends that live 7 miles away. Yeah. And it hasn't always been that way, but I think both you and I have kind of dove into the deep end of busyness lately. And so it's probably why this is a hot topic on both of our calendars.
Yeah, absolutely. People sometimes ask me how I come up with my blog ideas, and they're like, how did you know that this was something I needed to hear? I was like, it's all stuff that I usually struggle with badly. And so I need constant reminders. I need to talk it out, and the blog or podcast provides a great opportunity. And if I'm teaching it, it's more pressure to put my money where my mouth is.
Well, and for me, it's like free therapy, because you sent me this topic last night, and you were saying, hey, what do you think about this? And I was going, man, this is perfect timing. I had just gotten done with a conversation with my wife talking about my calendar for this next week.
Yeah.
And now you've convicted me. So I'm actually going to go through and eliminate some appointments. So I'm sorry if there's some clients listening today that you get chopped from the calendar next week. It's not you. It's me.
It's me.
It's totally me. But it needs to happen.
Yeah. And so in my productivity journey too, I've gone through several, we talked about this right before we clicked record today too, that I need constant reminders of this. My mentors are telling me this all the time, probably because they struggle with it too. But I've gone through several big like calendar purge cycles where I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to uncommit from a bunch of stuff and just see what happens. And we've talked a lot about mind-body issues too, and how stress and tension and self-induced pressure often, or external environmental pressure, can create physical symptoms in us. And your calendar can be a really big part of that if you're overcommitted. So for me, when I've gone through cycles of letting go of stuff, I have more peace, more focus, more clarity of mind, and probably more impact. I'm certain that there's more impact when I focus on less stuff. And we're going to talk about the implications of that.
Yeah, I've got 2 questions for you. I think you're probably going to go into it. But one is, we're not just talking about your calendar, correct? There's other aspects of life to consider. And then the second one, I think you alluded to it when you were describing that it's not just being aware of the issues, but why is it so hard for us to take stuff out of our life? Like, we can be aware that we're way too busy, or we can even, let me step back on that. Sometimes it's very easy for us to look at something and go, you know what, I'm not spending enough time with my kids. So we can add, right? We can add that time with our kids, and we could do that pretty effectively. But why is it so hard for us to just subtract? Why is it hard for us to look at our calendar and go, man, I have 8 appointments tomorrow or Monday, and that's not functional. I need to take some off of my calendar. Why is that so hard for us?
Gosh, we could do an entire episode on that one question. Some of the ideas that come to mind is it's usually the internal psychological dynamics of the person. We want to have an impact on the world. A lot of it is driven by perfectionism or hyper-achieving. Like, we feel we get a high and a reward from doing more and being validated by people. And so we get addicted to that. A lot of it is just about our brain's natural ability to become addicted to all kinds of things. So approval. So it can be driven by a people-pleasing thing. It's very common, especially for men, to escape their family life if they're having problems in their marriage or with their kids. Very, very easy to justify going into work more and setting more work-related goals. And when we're still, some people, right before their head hits the pillow, that's when your brain turns on and starts saying like, hey, you got to address this thing in your marriage. You've got an issue with your kids. You need to talk to your boss. So it's about avoidance. And it's about escaping the present moment, like not accepting what's something in your life and sitting down to deal with it. How's that for a minute answer?
No, it's great. I was wondering if you could talk about that study that you and I talked about with the Legos, because I think that was pretty fascinating, and it made me really think about how hard it is to subtract.
Yeah, so here's some of the neuroscience behind it. And if you guys are nerds like we are and you want to actually look at the study and the paper on it, it was published in Nature magazine. And the title of it is called People Systematically Overlook Subtractive Changes. We can put the link in the show notes too so that people can look it up. But it provides scientific support for how our brains have this natural tendency to look for additive solutions to problems and this has implications in almost every area of life. And that's how we're going to close the show today, is talking about how you can actually implement this and put this into practice and work against this natural tendency. So the researchers did 8 experiments in this case. And what they found was 90% of the time, the participants in the study looked for solutions to a problem that required adding something to solve the problem, even though taking something away would have been a far simpler and much more elegant and efficient solution. So there's this hilarious one you and I were just looking at. And I would encourage you guys to go and look at the image in the magazine online here, because it really paints a better picture than what I'll be able to describe. So in one of the examples, they brought these different people into different rooms, and they had the participants solve this like Lego problem. So the roof on the Lego structure was uneven, and they said, you need to make the roof level. But there was one giant brick in the corner that was making the roof not level. And instead of removing that brick, apparently people added a bunch of other bricks to make the structure level. And this is like 90% of the time, apparently. That 90% was the average, apparently, over the course of the 8 studies. They did 8 different experiments and activities that people could do. And so it's just one really powerful example of how we add things instead of take things away in order to make things easier for our lives.
Yeah, and I think we can attest to that. This week I was telling you I had to actually like book this out 3 weeks in advance. I started putting blocked out days in my calendar, and for the first time in I don't know how long, I went hiking by myself on Thursday with my dog. And I kept feeling like I was doing something wrong as I was driving away from work. And it was like, oh my gosh, are my clients going to understand that I just need a day? Is my office manager going to be okay without me there? Is my wife going to be okay? She's working and I'm kind of being the slacker and going up into the mountains. By the time I got there, all that was gone, and it was really what I needed. But the other thing that you touched on it, my mind got reset, and when I came in yesterday to work, I was much more focused. And instead of being all over the place, like I've got a million things to do, I was like laser focused on this one task that I needed to do, which was really cool because, being a business owner, I've got 25 balls in the air every given second. So,
yeah. So let me put you on the spot too and just ask, when you've got this voice in your head that is telling you, what if people don't understand that you're gone? What if somebody needs you? What are some of the core issues that are at play there?
I think that it's mostly lies that we tell ourselves. It's probably a lot of people pleasing, and probably a little bit, I wouldn't say a little bit, it's probably significantly ego. Like I'm so important that I can't be gone. Now, I would never admit that to myself in the moment, but that kind of comes down to it. And to be honest, most of the clients that come to us are our kind of people, right? They want to take care of their families. They want to take care of their businesses. They want to be responsible to the community. And they all struggle with the same things we do, which is finding time to relax and rest and have vacations. And so I'd say the vast majority of my clients are appreciative of it. It might be a little inconvenient because they wanted to come in for an appointment or whatever, but they don't mind waiting 3 or 4 days to get back on my calendar. And the ones that throw a fit, to be honest, I don't really want them as clients anyway. I mean, I probably shouldn't vocalize that as much as I do, but if you put such high demands on other people and it has to be on your calendar and to the point where other people's personal lives are affected, then you probably should look in the mirror a little bit before you start getting upset with your service providers. I love to service my clients, but I'm no good to them if I'm completely run into the ground at all. So
Yeah.
I think most of them understand that.
Yeah, and you mentioned ego too. I mean, obviously our ego is deeply involved in almost everything we do. But there's an element of control too, right? We often think that we're not sure if we can trust other people to do what it is that we do. So you mentioned driving away from the office thinking like, oh, am I going to be needed? So yeah, there's all these issues that are with psychological underpinnings that are driving us unconsciously towards busyness and taking on more.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk about some of the areas of life that people can apply this concept or where they show up in our lives. Why don't you talk about goals? You just kind of talked about that, but in what ways do we look for additive solutions where we could subtract with goals?
Yeah, I think that we want to accomplish everything all at once. And so when we look at goals or even life planning, we'll map out like our 20-year plan or whatever and say, these are the buckets I need to invest in. But with our goals, we tend to want to do them all at once, right? So we want to tackle improving our marriage, improving our fitness, becoming the best leader at work, becoming the best father. And we throw them all on the board at one time, and we're trying to accomplish everything all at once. Instead, maybe there's a season where I need to focus on my marriage, which means I need to carve out more time for date nights, which means I need to do less of other stuff in the evenings. And I think that's where our goals, we just need to prioritize them and realize we just can't accomplish them all at one time.
Yeah, I think Greg McCune says our brain wants everything all at once right now. And I know that was true of me. As soon as I read it, I thought, yep, that's how my brain works. So another really key area, and we've talked a ton about this probably across different episodes, is finances. Our default is usually to look for more ways to make money, when all the research tends to show that people are not doing a budget, so they don't know what's coming in and going out. They don't know their expenses. They're not saving enough for retirement. And they might be taking on so much debt that they're paying all this interest over the course of their lives. And a lot of people are living beyond their means. So the easiest solution is often, granted, if you're below the poverty level, there are certain income markers where if you're below that, you definitely need more income, and there's no amount of budgeting that's going to help you. So I don't want to insult anyone that's looking for a better job. But in many cases in the West, and especially the United States, the easiest solution would be to spend less and put yourself on a budget, control some of those appetites, as opposed to just trying for promotions and making more money. Often we promote to a level of a job we hate when we could have stayed at something that we were much happier in, that gave us a lot more freedom with our time. What's another way we do that?
Well, I think you touched on it with our commitments. We tend to commit to everything, whether it's business related, community related. It's all good. It's all good stuff, right? If I look at my commitments that I've made, well, I can't say it's always good stuff, but most of the time it's good commitments. It could be a networking event. It could be, lunch with another advisor or CPA or client. It could be commitments with my family. It could be commitments to volunteering at my church or in the community. But we fall in love with commitments, and we stand behind them because, dang it, I'm a person of character and I committed, so I have to do this. And those are all good things, and you do want to be a man or a woman of your word. But sometimes you need to stop before you give your word and evaluate where your commitments are. Do you have too many of them right now in this season? Saying no now doesn't mean saying no forever. It just means it's not a good season, right? In 3 months, for me, during tax season, I can't commit to anything except for my family, trying to stay healthy, and trying to keep my shop up and running.
Yeah, and there's no limit to the number of things in the modern world we can potentially commit to. I mean, with social media and the ways that people can get a hold of us now, if you've got different social media platforms that you participate in, people can ping you. One of the things that drives me nuts about my current workplace even is whenever we add technology, there's now instant messaging and Microsoft Teams, and people can ping you through Outlook, and then they could call your desk phone, and they could call my cell phone, and I could get a call on my personal phone, or you can get a text message. So if you're just entangled in this, I certainly have been there. It might be time to shut down some of the ways that people can kind of get in on your time and get a hold of you. So make it harder for people to get a hold of you is one way to uncommit from stuff. Yeah, just there are infinite ways that we can become overcommitted by signing up for an extra thing. We dramatically underestimate the amount of time that things are going to take. That's another tendency we have.
Let me say one other thing that we've talked about it a little bit on the show, probably not for months, but when you commit to the wrong people, you don't have time for the right people.
Oh.
So if you have fringe friends, we've talked about your core friends or the core people in your life. If you have fringe friends that you maybe see once a year, but all of a sudden you start making commitments to them to go to dinner or go, have a drink or coffee or whatever, you don't have time for your core friends. And so sometimes, and I'm speaking from personal experience, you've got to step back and go, okay, if I fill this available time slot with this person, is this really like the best use of my time? Because I haven't seen, like what you and I were just saying, we hadn't seen each other in months, but I had made time for people that maybe I don't dislike them, but they're not core friends. And then when I stop and realize, like, gosh, I haven't seen my core friends in a long time. You only have so much time in the day. And so making those commitments before you stop and evaluate them can really cause damage to your relationships.
Yeah. So I once saw a study, and I don't have it in front of me, that it said something like you really only have enough time to effectively manage or invest in like up to 7 quality relationships in your life at any given time. And so if you've got a family, a lot of those are taken up. A lot of those slots are taken up by your family members, kids, spouse, or if you live with your parents or something. It takes a lot of time. So 2 more ways we're going to talk about. One of them is at work. Like if you're an organizational leader, it's really common to take on there's this addiction to new projects, new committees, new meetings. It's really, really easy. It's a common problem in organizations to just add stuff without subtracting. So here's a challenge to any of you leaders. 2 things I think really that have helped me, 2 tips. One is if you have control over when you set meetings, try stacking all your meetings on Monday. Like luckily my boss is really awesome. She was super open-minded to this, and we ended up stacking almost all of our organizational meetings on a Monday. But what that does is it frees up a ton of time for people to go really deep and do what's called deep work on projects so that they can get really focused and really productive on the biggest projects that they need to be working on without fragmenting their weekly schedule and their time and shooting it full of holes with meetings throughout the week. So that's one tip. The other tip would be try canceling meetings. Even if it's really hard to let go of the meeting, try canceling it for 3 weeks or a month and see if you need it, because you can always add it back. So cancel meetings that have no clear purpose or that just don't need to get done that day. Just skip it. And stacking meetings on a different day. And don't just keep adding to your organization, because then it just gets tangled up in knots and people get overworked. And when people are overworked, it's one of the primary reasons why people quit. And then you can lose good team members because you're burning them out. The last thing we'll talk about today, I would say, is possessions. This is a pretty obvious one. Clint, in what ways can we become just buried underneath stuff, and what does it do to our lives?
Gosh, I mean, in so many ways. One of them is if you have a closet full of clothes, instead of being able to be efficient in the morning and go and get dressed, you have to decide between way too many clothes. The other ways are, I've heard it asked, how much time do you spend taking care of stuff, right? So if you buy a new boat, you've got to maintain the boat, you've got to clean the boat, you've got to move the boat, you have to winterize the boat, store the boat. Yeah, which none of that's bad. I'm just saying we don't think about those things. We think, okay, this is going to add value to my family. Okay, if I buy jet skis, what does that do? Well, now I've got to gas them up and I've got to maintain them, all these things. So we can create more work for ourselves by buying stuff. And we just have to be aware of that we're going to give up some time for that possession. And I think that's, we've talked about Zach, and Zach is going to be listening to this because he produces our show. He's fascinating. And I think his goal was to get down to under 100 possessions. So
wow.
When I think about that, I go, geez, I have more t-shirts than that. I probably should be aware. I should be really aware of this topic. And in fact, we just bought paddle boards the other day, and which is a great thing because we love
That's a great
board.
investment, by the way. Now you can actually come paddleboarding with me if you can uncommit from your other commitments.
It is great. But then I looked around my garage and I went, where in the world am I going to put these things? But that's another problem I'm trying to solve.
Well, by the way, that you said you have more than 100 shirts. Is that a brand new shirt you're wearing? Man, just throw me right under the bus. Yes, it is a brand new shirt that I'm wearing. Yeah. Well, let's reframe it as wonderful accountability from your closest friends.
Well, so
it's a cool shirt.
I will say this for myself. I did create a rule that anytime I buy a new piece of clothing, I have to subtract a piece of clothing. So,
oh, that's good.
So I'm net zero.
You're back to 100?
Yeah, back to 100 t-shirts. Yes.
So let's recap this and land the plane. You guys, neuroscience shows that our brain has a tendency to look for additive solutions to almost any problem in life instead of deducting things or taking things away. And in fact, Jesus said this a long time ago. It is in Luke chapter 12, verse 15, where he said, watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. So it's like overcommitting to anything. Life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. I've come back to that verse more times than I can think of and still struggle with it, but he knew what he was talking about 2,000 years ago. So yeah, this can happen. Our ability to add too many things in our life can come in the form of possessions, goals, finances, being overcommitted, clothing, work initiatives, and tasks. So hopefully you got something out of this. I would challenge all of you to experiment with this in the next week. Like pick something and implement it. You'll be much more likely to make a behavior change in your life if you put this into practice right away.
Yeah, absolutely. I am committing myself. As soon as we're done with this recording, I'm going to cancel some appointments for next week. That is my subtraction. But hey, if you guys have tuned in and you got something out of this, we would love for you to subscribe and share it with a friend. And if you get a second to leave us a review, those also help us. If you want to catch up with Parker or you want to actually read more on this subject, he has a great blog that he just put out yesterday. And you can find that at leadyouFirst.com. You can sign up for his weekly newsletter that you'll get these wonderful blogs. Most of our content that Parker and I talk about come directly from his blog. In the meantime, keep climbing your next peak.